Hi, happy Friday. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are. We have a bunch of people from all across the world, a bunch of different industries. I think we're represented by pretty much every industry there is. We got energy, telecom, finance, transportation, healthcare, education, utilities, manufacturing, insurance, government, and retail. I think that covers everything. So happy to have everyone here. Hope everyone is healthy, had a good week. Looking forward to the weekend. And so let's go ahead and we'll start diving in. If we check the poll, looks like we got about half of people are blue teamers. We got a few red teamers in here. Welcome, red teamers. And then we also have about 30% purple teamers. So we got a great dispersed crowd, representing the InfoSec community, which is awesome. Hopefully you'll get some good takeaways that you can take back to your organization and implement, whether it's from the red team side or the purple team side or the blue team side. We want to really come together and help drive more secure organizations. And so with that, I'm Christopher Peacock. I am the adversary emulation detection engineer at Scythe. I have previous background at Raytheon Intelligence and Space, General Dynamics, Ordnance and Tactical Systems, and Alpha 2. I started my way up from help desk to network engineer, and then into a SOC analyst. Worked my way up to tier 3 SOC, incident responder, and intel analyst as well, and a threat hunter. So I run the gamut of blue team side, but I do study the red team as well, because I feel like studying the red team really helps you be a better blue teamer. I used to coach football. One of the things we did was we would get into a film room and we would study the opponent on film and we would analyze their TTPs. From there, we could develop our defenses. And like that, cyber is actually a lot the same way. We have a special shout out to Elaine, who's going to be helping with our class. Elaine is excellent. If you have any questions, ping us. The lab VMware can have some issues at time with the VMs. You might have to restart them or something like that. Elaine is the helper with us to pretty much keep those gremlins at bay and help it go as smooth as possible. Also check her out. She does some great blogs and great work with csmp.org. So check those out as well. So what are we going to get out of this hands-on format? We're going to go through, you're going to have an individual lab environment that's for you. There's not going to be anyone else playing in your lab, so you don't have to worry about them disrupting it. It's all yours. It's siloed off. Like we said before, or if you're late, you will have an email from VMware Learning Platform. That'll be your lab with a unique URL for yourself. If you share it out, it can get wonky, so I would not recommend sharing your lab link out to others to play with, because if you're trying to play with it too, it's not going to work well for you. We're going to go ahead and we're going to do a lecture of some key concepts, and then we're going to go and dive into the lab and we're going to reinforce those concepts. It'll be roughly about 3 hours. We might wrap up a little short depending upon how fast we get through things. And with that as well, in your environment, you do have a unicorn box, which is the main box that will operate from. You have a Scythe box that allows you to interact with Scythe and do the emulations. If you don't want to use the Scythe emulations for whatever purpose, you can use SANS Slingshot to manually do everything yourself. And then we also have a domain controller as well. Some of the takeaways we want to drive home are just learning about purple teaming. What is purple teaming? How can you do it in your environment? What works for you? And then equipping yourself with some of the knowledge, such as the purple team exercise framework, the maturity model, diving into some of our Threat Thursdays, and also what is Scythe and how can you use it in your organization. So when it comes to purple teaming, one of the things that we like to break down is the attack, detect, and respond. What that boils down to is you're going to get threat intelligence from somewhere. It could be from digital forensics incident response that say, hey, actors are doing this. It could be from a report you read, or sandboxing, things like that. From there, you can emulate those in an emulation attack against your infrastructure. And then you're going to track how you're performing because of the detect and the response. We want to actually generate those logs generate those alerts, and then see what the SOC is doing. Because it's one thing you can say, hey, this generated alerts, that's great, but what does it mean? You know, if it generates a medium alert and no one's actually working medium alerts, they're only working highs and criticals, then it doesn't really mean anything in your overall process. So we want to actually, you know, audit that process and procedure based on real world threat information. And what we're focused on here is, if you're familiar with the cyber kill chain, it's a way to map out and delineate different phases of the attack. And it starts with reconnaissance and weaponization. And then you have the delivery and exploitation. This could be something like delivering an exploit to a web server and actually exploiting that CVE, or it could be exploiting the end user so they could click on, you know, Excel macros, so to speak, to run the code. We're not quite really focusing here in the detection engineering workshop. We're more looking towards like installation type things, and even more so actions on objectives. We want to focus on the actions on objectives phase. So, you know, when our proof point or our mail gateway fails because something's going to get through, you know, it might block 90% of attacks, it might block 99% of attacks. Either way, something's going to get through. And then once something gets through, you know, we have our AV, we have our EDR, but it might not catch that. So how do we get to that next level of when something actually gets through and on a host? How can we detect it before it actually moves through our environment and finds our crown jewels, whether that be information or processes? You know, it could be information that the threat actor is trying to get to compromise, or it could be certain processes that they could bring down and then, you know, force us to pay a ransom. So once again, we really want to focus on this action on objective side in this workshop. Overview what purple teaming looks like. You get the new CTI, like we said, the TTPs to test. You have to analyze and extract those. Then you're going to typically have a tabletop discussion about how you're going to do this in your environment, how you're going to replicate this type of activity in your environment so that you don't, you know, impact production or anything like that. We definitely recommend actually performing things in production. When you perform in production, it just gives you that actual live fire type thing that you just can't replicate anywhere else. Trainings often, they have a different tech stack, or if you throw something on a specific box only for testing, you're not actually going to test the SOC or the MSSP that's monitoring it. So we want to actually test all those processes and give them, you know, a real life type of event. And then at the end of it, we can say, hey, look, this was just a test. Great job. Or, hey, we missed this, and here's where we can improve, so that when the real threat actor shows up, we're ready for them. And then, so after the tabletop discussion, you emulate the attack, and then you do the blue side, which is what do we need to work on, you know, either from a response standpoint or what detection engineering can we do? And that's where detection engineering fits in. And you repeat the cycle with new TTPs or bypasses for the detection engineering. One of the things of understanding a threat briefly is just knowing that there are components of a threat. And some of those, or the three components of those, are intent, capability, and opportunity. So when you're thinking about threats to the organization, you need to know what the intent is of these threat actors. Certain threat actors have different objectives and intents. You know, ransomware, they want to make money. They don't care really who you are. They just want to make money. So if you're an easy target, or if you know, could potentially have a high payout, then that's what they're looking for. Alternatively, something like an APT from China, they might have intent to go after things laid out in the 5-year plan, which tells them what sort of economic growth they want. So those sectors will be targeted more, or it could be trade, such as Belt and Road Initiative. Capabilities, these are their tools and exploits. You see where like a lower level actor, they may not have many tools. They might only have access to, say, like Metasploit or something, or a cracked version of Cobalt Strike. As you get more advanced capabilities, usually that comes with, you know, money. So more money, if a threat actor has more money, they're going to be able to buy better talent, better tools, or purchase, you know, exploit capabilities as well. So as the intent goes up and as the capability goes up, that means the threat is going up. And then finally, we get to the opportunity phase. And this is where From opportunity, this is like the one thing the organization can help control, and this is limiting your threat service, right? Because you don't want to have too many vulnerabilities out there, especially on, you should patch pretty much immediately everything on the edge, because otherwise threat actors are developing the exploits with almost days now and exploiting those. So you can scope down opportunity by doing, following those type of NIST controls and CIS controls and things like that you should follow. That helps limit the opportunity. So this is just understanding what a threat is. This is more of CTI side, but some teams might not have a CTI team. So from a detection engineer, we also have to understand kind of what is a threat that we might have to develop detections on. Someone asked if I recommend doing black box live testing without notifying the SOC and MSSP. That's up to you. It depends where you are as far as your maturity. And what it comes down to really is, if you're really low maturity level, you might want to do some hand holding first when you first do these. But otherwise, I definitely recommend, try to be as real as you can. That's what we're built to do, is be like real attackers in the environment with real command and control, performing real actions on objectives. So, you can do a walkthrough if you want to, or you can go and do a full-on scrimmage where it looks like a live game. That's what I recommend, is making it as close to live action as possible so that you're trained up. So also understanding the cyber threat intelligence piece of this. If you are, the lonely detection engineer, it's coming down to understanding your organization, and that's the side of opportunity, and also who may attack you because of what sort of information or processes you have. So you identify the adversaries, you want to gather the intelligence, and then you want to extract the TTPs from there. Then you also want to analyze and organize, create an action plan, and then do the emulation. This is a very simplistic view of it. It's actually more complex than that. And it kind of looks something like this. So you would get a piece of intelligence, and then you have to actually extract all the different TTPs out of there. And for what we're trying to get down to is procedure level. A lot of things, when they map to MITRE, they don't get down to the procedure level. So if you see like T0013 credential dumping, well, credential dumping, that's a great procedure, or that's a great TTP, but what is the actual procedure that the adversary is using? So here we actually see proc dump to dump the LSAS process. So that's what we actually want to emulate, is that, like, we don't want to use a different credential dumping necessarily procedure when the threat actor is actually using proc dump to do it. So we're focusing on the procedure level because, you could say this threat actor uses this technique, but that doesn't get you close enough to the procedure level, as certain techniques may have 50 different ways or 100 different ways that they could actually be performed. Thankfully, we do a lot of this heavy work for you, and we have Threat Thursdays that come out. They're once a month, so you can feel free to check them out. We post them to GitHub as well. Some of them you can actually go through and run some of the samples yourself by doing the command lines, or you can work and massage it into your own C2 that you want to use. You can look at the C2 matrix to get a C2, or you can do it with Scythe. And then we also post the write-ups on our blogs that are available at scythe.io Threat Thursday. And you can go through those blogs and look at detection opportunities as well. And so this is an example where we've gone ahead and we've extracted out the TTPs. Typically what we see is we actually go further, and it doesn't fit on this page, but then we have the description of the techniques mapped, and then we'll put the procedures over even further on the right of this. So once you've extracted, analyzed, and gathered the procedures, it's time to do a tabletop discussion. This is where you want to go ahead and talk about, hey, are we going to do a live test without notifying the SOC or MSSP? Or are we going to do it together because we're just starting out, or maybe it's a very complex, attack. So this is where you start going through things of how are we going to implement this plan? How do we make sure it's safe in our environment? And then what do we expect? Do we expect it to be logged? Do we think there's going to be logging gaps? Do we think there's going to be alerting gaps? What tools do we think will stop it? And then what should the response probably look like, from the SOC to make sure that we think, or that this is kind of to validate what we think our environment's like as far as our defensive posture. As you do more exercises, you'll develop a better flow of what to expect from your security stack and team. So with that, now you've had the tabletop discussion and you can do the drill, so to speak, and we can do the red team emulation. Like we said previously, you can go out and you can use the C2 matrix. If you want to do everything manually, you can check out the C2 matrix, figure out which sort of command and control you want to use. There's some great ones out there as well. Highly recommend looking at it. George, our CTO, helped put this together and they keep it pretty up to date. So it's definitely a good resource to have. Or alternatively, we do offer Scythe, which is a C2 matrix with a synthetic malware that you can deploy, and we have the pre-built campaigns for you. That allows you to emulate different threat actors, or you can also build your own, and then you can have repeated testing in different networks. Or if you need to do repeated testing, to see how you're improving over time, and if detection engineering or SOC response is improving over time to that campaign, or if you need to change up different techniques as well to bypass certain things. So we've done the extraction of TTPs down to the procedure level. We then had a tabletop discussion about how we're going to perform them in our organization. Then we emulate them. Then we get to the blue team side. So this is, were there alerts for this? What procedures had alerts? And then what were the responses to those alerts? Were they appropriate responses as well? And then are there logs that we could tailor alerts to, and do that detection engineering to help put more pretty much landmines in the environment, so to speak, so that if a threat actor does not just one of the procedures, but we want to focus on catching as many procedures up from them as we can, instead of just focusing on, hey, we detected this one procedure, we'll catch them all the time. Because if they just change that one procedure, then we're in trouble. And then we also want to identify any visibility gaps. One time we were on engagement and we were emulating a Cobalt Strike name pipe creation. And we actually found out that the customer had a visibility gap with name pipes because of the certain EDR did not log name pipes. So you can also identify visibility gaps, and then you can mark those down as well. So we've done all that. And then this is where we get to the detection engineering side. And that's, what is detection engineering? Well, the purpose is to detect suspicious events that may be indicative of malicious actors. And we say may be indicative because we're going to find some weird stuff. It could be approved stuff on the network, or on a host, but we want to find suspicious things so that we can look into them further. And this is David Bianco's Pyramid of Pain. If you're unfamiliar with it, it pretty much talks about adversaries, how easy it is for them to change certain things. So for them to change a hash value, that's pretty trivial. It's pretty easy for them to change IP addresses. Domain names, they can randomly generate those as well. And then you start working your way up until you get to the procedure level. When it's procedure level, it becomes very hard for them to change. When you look at like the Conti playbook, if you've ever looked at that, they actually have a step-by-step, procedure by procedure by procedure of what they're doing. The atomic IOCs, such as an IP and hash, those will change, but the operators behind it are going to follow these procedures to the T most of the time to make sure that it always works. So for them to rewrite a new playbook, that's going to take more time to develop and then write out and then disseminate. And then the same thing goes as well for other adversaries. If you're working, if you're a government adversary, you only have approved actions on objectives that you can take. And so those are pretty, those are pretty static procedures that can only change with a certain process behind it for change controls. So with that, we let vendors kind of focus on the other stuff. We'll let our IOC feeds focus on IP and hash values. Those can come into our SIM, or they can go into a MISP instance and then get vetted and piped over to our SIM. We'll let the IOCs, they can pretty much be automated over there. Then when we look at things like network artifacts and tools and things like that and host artifacts, that's where we're kind of relying on our vendors, right? We're looking for our firewall vendor to come out and say, hey, there's a new exploit XYZ. And then so we've developed XYZ's detection to go in. So that's one of the areas where you want to keep your firewall rules up to date, because those firewall vendors they have detection engineers who specialize in catching network traffic. So they develop those. We're relying on them to do that. Not so much, that's not really an in-house function to go in and start writing like your own snort type rules, because you're already paying someone else to do that. And then you look at like YARA, that's more applicable to AV. For the most part, we're not writing YARA rules and stuff because we're already paying people who do that. But then when we get down to the procedure level, where people are using, living off the land techniques, or when they throw a box on the network and we don't even have any visibility into that box, what does it look like when it enumerates Active Directory? Are we going to have Active Directory enumeration in the SIM? Or if they're using certain living off the land binaries and scripts, we're going to be looking at our EDR or our sysmon collection. So what are some of the strategic drivers behind detection engineering? They're data collection, because we like logs if you're a data or if you're a security engineer. And then also operational capability, and we'll get into what that really means. And then threat understanding as well is kind of like the final piece of how you really start evolving your detection engineering. So data collection is knowing what data you are collecting and then where is it. If you don't have host data, then you could be missing a lot of your data sources. And then also knowing where it exists. Sometimes people will say that, we're focusing our engineering efforts in the SIM, but then you have to look at it and say, well, where are the most crucial logs? Are they in the SIM or are they in the EDR? Or do they send from the firewall? Do we have DNS synchro logs? Are those being sent to the SIM, or are those just being stored locally on the firewall? So we have different things like this of trying to decide where the crucial data is and how do we look into it to do the engineering behind it. And then one of the questions is, well, how do you prioritize data sources? And one of the ways we look at doing this is, obviously you have strategic drivers yourself about how to do your data collection, such as meeting compliance and different things like that. But attack does have a way of deciphering which techniques are applicable to a certain data source. So here we see that command execution as a data source is applicable to 243 MITRE attack techniques. So that's probably a crucial data source if you really want good attack coverage. And then process creation and file modification. If you look at that, the top three are actually host-based processes, which is why people are really gearing over towards EDR or sysmon collections. We do have network traffic content and the network traffic flow as well, and then file creation and so on and so forth. So this is just one area where you can look to see what you need to prioritize because of how much coverage you want over adversaries' techniques and tactics and procedures. The next strategic driver is operational capacity. I kind of call this the detection cyborg, so to speak. And this is the level of capability and proficiency between the analyst and the tools. Great analysts can be hindered by inefficient tools. So, if you have a really good analyst, but maybe they can't query the data they need because they're having to do some weird, backwards SIM query to some EDR that they don't have access to, and they're only able to pull certain data, occasionally, so things like this. Or maybe the SIEM's not appropriately sized, so queries run really, really slow. So that's also gonna, that's gonna bring down your operational capacity. And then also you can have great tools, but if you have novice analysts, then that's also going to bring down your operational capacity. So that's one of the strategic drivers as well. Finally, we have threat understanding. And this is where Purple Team informed adversary emulation really comes in. And because detection does not operate in a vacuum, we can't just say, hey, we're going to go out and detect, this, and this, but no adversary is using it. And the adversary comes in and they use something totally different. So that's where, you can't just focus on what someone published on Twitter because it has, 3,000 retweets on Twitter InfoSec, when you can, focus over here at what actual adversaries are doing right now with active cyber threat intelligence. So that's where knowing what it looks like, what your adversaries are doing, really plays into, having a threat understanding of what it would look like if they were in your environment. What capabilities do they have as far as tools and procedures that they operate on? And just another example of this is, for the longest time, people didn't know that PowerShell could be used maliciously. It was, hey, let's focus on catching malware using antivirus. And then, for the longest time, people didn't know that PowerShell was something that was actually used maliciously and built into Windows. So you have to get out and know what adversaries are doing to be able to defend against them. So always keeping up to date on that. And that's just that bit of cyber threat intelligence, helping that keep you up to date as to what actors are doing. So the process of detection engineering, it comes down to getting that direction, from the cyber threat intelligence. Hey, here's the procedures. So we do that, we perform it, and then we have collection. And that's where we identify what data we need to collect to do the engineering. Then we actually do the engineering or the processing. Then we have to disseminate that back out. How does that fit into the overall Purple Team cycle? It's right here. It's after the emulation of attack. That gives us the direction, and then we disseminate it back into the cycle. And that's where we get either new CTI to adjust the plan that we were in, or you can also bounce it off your red team and say, hey, the adversary is doing this, this, and this. We're catching it here and here. What might the adversary do potentially in these steps that we could change to make sure that we're catching things? And then you can rerun the cycle as well. So we've already got direction, whether that comes from you yourself because you're on a small team, or whether that comes from a CTI team and a red team as well. That's up to your organization. But what you're going to have to do either way, whoever creates the direction, you're going to have to do the collection side of looking through logs. And this can take a while, and it can be overwhelming at times. But we can help drill down on where we should look pretty quickly, especially if we know the process ID, the process name, and the host as well. We have data source components. That's provided to us by MITRE. So when we look at this, we'll say, hey, our CTI team, or we already mapped it to MITRE, or a report already mapped it to MITRE attack, and we know the technique. So here we have an example of PowerShell with the technique ID. If you actually go down to the bottom of the page, it'll give you detections, and it'll say that you can use, command with command execution as the data component, or in our instance, we're going to say process. It's going to be process creation. What does that look like though overall? So with that, we had process creation, which gets us down to the data component level. So then we go in, and you have to dive deeper to see what it means for your organization when you're trying to dive into these logs of what logs do you need. And that's where the InfoSec community kind of comes in hand, but we still have a little bit of a shortcoming here. though we have a tool that lets you do this. So if you look here, MITRE is going to give you the process creation that you need this data source to be able to detect this technique and procedure. And here we map it to event logs. That's what we have to do. If you need help diving into this, then they also provide a section where, so if you click on process creation in the page, and I'll just show you what it looks like. So we come over here, we have the PowerShell. We then scroll down. And then as you scroll down, you get to mitigations, and then there's also detections. And this is where we get the log sources. Well, not the log sources, but the data sources we need. And then if we click on process creation, it'll give us some samples. Now you might not have Sysmon event ID 1, or you might not have Windows event ID 4688. You might be using an EDR or something. And that's where, how do you map this in your organization? Well, one of the recommendations we have is actually detect. So what detect allows you to do is if you go to it and then you go to data sources, you can create a new file, or if you have an existing file, you can upload your own. And then they recently did this new function, which I really am thankful for, because I used to I had to make my own YAML file that would upload, that would pre-populate everything. But you go ahead and you click add all data sources, and then you can go through the data sources. So if you say active DNS, you can come in and you can actually say what products you have for that data source. So you can start mapping out your logs to each data source. And then what that does is at the end of the day, you know where your logs are that are applicable for the data source. And then you can actually map them over. Detect allows you to transfer that to a attack navigator. And then you can look to see, available data sources, and then you can see what your products are. So here it's saying that for account discovery, all the data sources are covered, and the product here is Sysmon. Might be different in your organization, and it's obviously different for each tactic and technique as well. So that's one way to do the collection side. If you want to dive in that way, another one is you can start searching on process ID. But what we get down to is we're starting to try to process. So we may identify visibility gaps when we do the collection. And if so, we want to document those. We want to start hypothesizing, how would I detect this in my environment? Because we've gone out and we started looking at the different logs. We see what we have, we see what we don't have. So we need to start thinking about how we could detect this. And you want to create a wide hypothesis. So it's like, if the threat actor is using PowerShell, it's like, all right, well, let's look for all PowerShell. And then you'll probably do a search. And then you'll see that, oh, we can't focus on all PowerShell. And then you'll have to start hypothesizing, well, how will we detect this? Maybe it's PowerShell doing a network connection outbound, or maybe it's PowerShell that's encoded, or maybe it's PowerShell off of certain parent processes or certain child processes that come off of PowerShell. So these are the things that we have to start hypothesizing on. And we start narrowing it down. And then we also want to embrace a certain amount of false positives, but not too many false positives, because we don't want to get too granular that we could potentially miss a threat actor using it. One of the ways that, we can start just hypothesizing, even when we just see certain CTI, here was a SolarWinds Server U software with O-Day exploit. And, maybe you can't catch that O-Day exploit, right? But you can detect, once again, those actions on objectives, because once they land on the box, they still, they're going to have to conduct something on the attack map pretty much. And here we see MSHTA with a WAN connection. So we can, start hypothesizing, oh, well, let's look at MSHTA making network connections. What does that look like in our environment? Does it make any network connections? Does it only talk internally? Does it talk externally to certain IPs or certain domains that we can tune out? So we start thinking about that. We also see who am I execution. Can we detect, anomalous who am I execution in our environment? Or maybe certain parameters such as, who am I outputting to a text document? Maybe that's not very common in our environment, so we can, hone into that. So what we're getting to is we ask some common questions like these. And what we look at is we say, what is the application or command or whatever it is used? How is that used in the procedure? And how is it used maliciously in our environment? Or how would it be? And so we need to start understanding, how the adversary is conducting it and what it would look like in our environment. And how often is the procedure executed in normal operations? If it's rarely executed, we may want to go ahead and do a broad alert. So, if they're using a certain living off the land binary, something like finger.exe, maybe finger.exe never launches in our environment. So we can just, hone in on any execution of that. Or it could be something else that we have to actually do a lot of tuning behind. So then we get down to also, how is the application and procedure leveraged in our environment because of something, we might have a certain CTI that says, this is how they do it. And okay, but that might only have been how they did it in an environment because an environment variable. So we might have different variables. So if you cross that over, what would that look like in ours? And then how can we emulate that? Someone asked for process creation, what should we look for? Parent process or process itself? What is normal and what is abnormal? And this is just where you'll have to dive in. Sometimes, it might be looking at parent process. Sometimes it might be looking at the child process. It just depends on your environment and what you're trying to get to through your baseline. And we'll go over some of this further down. So this is where we get into, some of that tuning that we were just talking about is, are there common parent processes we can tune out, or are there common parent processes that we can tune into? Depending upon how the adversary is leveraging things, maybe we want to tune in on certain parent processes. Are there common child processes that we can tune out or tune into? One of the common ones for, child processes is to look for suspicious activity coming off of your web servers. So Java, Apache, or IIS processes, W3WP. A lot of times, you don't see command prompt or PowerShell or a bunch of these living off the land binaries and scripts coming off of those. So it's one of those things where maybe we want to actually tune into certain processes coming off of those web server processes to see if an ODE is used, it still has to have something that's going to kick off behind it. And typically that looks like something like a command prompt or a PowerShell script spawning after. So you can catch those things. And then we go, is it used with common command line parameters that we can tune out or into? So in my environment, I might want to tune out certain command line parameters. Or maybe like before when we looked at command prompt was being outputted, or not command prompt, but who am I was being outputted to a .text, maybe that's something we tune into. And then does the procedure have certain command line parameters? So, for certain procedures, they're going to have certain command line parameters. And if that's the case, then we can definitely tune into those. Now, often those can change, especially if you're using different things like invoke obfuscation by David Bohannon. That's going to change like the PowerShell command line parameters. There's other things though that we'll see later. Run DLL with certain command line parameters, we can definitely tune into. Then we also want to look at, like we said previously, network connections. Can they be baselined? Can we tune out, domains or IPs? Also, how does it connect, or what does it connect to? Does it only connect to local host typically? And then we can flag if it doesn't connect to local host, because that would be suspicious. Does it only connect within our environment and doesn't go outbound? SMB going outbound, we probably should flag on that. And then, or does it connect to external but not internal? Then let's flag on that. So that's some other things that you want to try to think about when you're, some of those questions you want to ask, and this helps you develop a hypothesis of how I should write a rule. From there, we have the a processing quick example. And this just looks for WMIC execution. Sometimes, you can go into an environment and you can say, I want to look for any WMIC execution. Here, though, this is just a quick example where we search the environment and then we get the data back. And now we can just go ahead and baseline. We see that we have an Amazon SSM agent, and that's accounting for most of our activity. We also had some Scythe emulations that we ran, and we see that, okay, we can go ahead and we can pretty much, we can tune out these two processes, and then we can alert on anything else in our environment. So that's just a quick example of how you can tune down pretty quick. Dissemination, what this comes down to is delivering to our stakeholders. And so this might be delivering, SOC, your deliverable. It might be an alert with documentation, reasoning, context around how the search works or the alert works so that they know. If you don't want to write a overly vague search and then hand it over, and then they don't really understand why this is malicious or anything, or why it could potentially be malicious. And then also documenting potential responses. This might come from a detection engineer, or it could come with working with the incident response team, or working with like a SOC tier 3 type person. Just depends on your organization. Management, that's another stakeholder that we have to deliver to, and it might also be the CTI team. They might want these type of things for metrics, different metrics, also to record, the content to see where we're building logs in, or where the alerts, what logs are being used for the alerts, so that you can see where you're getting the best bang for your buck from log collection. And then you can also, the CTI team likes to track stuff, so they can also see what alerts are applicable to what attack IDs. And then also, if you have any sort of red team, distributing back to the red team is a big one, because they can help you determine if the alert can be bypassed pretty easily. And then you can retest that bypass that they develop. If you don't have any structure yet of how to do this type of dissemination, we definitely recommend Palantir's ADS framework. It's well thought out. Palantir is a big defense contractor, for those of you who don't know, and they have a pretty good team. So they've gone through and they've actually published their framework of how they do this, and it breaks it down into categories. I definitely recommend looking at it. This might be too involved for your organization if you're not as mature as them, but you can, take what you need for your organization from this framework. Definitely recommend looking into it. So we've gone through that type of process of what we're going to be doing in the lab once we get into it. And we'll do that hands-on portion and actual training. But then first, we want to highlight, why does Purple Team matter? And we did a case study with the National Motor Freight and Traffic Association, and it was a six-week Purple Team exercise. Did the assume breach. So we're not trying to fish our way in, because that could waste a full week until we get someone to click. The fact is that someone's going to click eventually. Somehow we're going to get in. Maybe, there's a new vulnerability published and we use that day one of publishing. We're going to get in. So we go ahead and we assume that we don't want to waste resources on, trying to emulate an attacker getting in, because we're wasting those resources. We know that they're going to get in somehow. Let's make sure we can catch them once they are. So with that, we have the assumed breach scenario. Scythe was hired to perform all major roles, red, blue, and CTI. The challenge was to spend $0 on new technology and only tune current security controls. So with this case study, we did some baseline testing. We made sure that C2 was up and running, and we started understanding the controls. We then started with a low threat or a low sophisticated actor, and then we started working our way up week over week. And then we finally got to the week 6, where we're really letting the red team threat actors at it. And that's where they can, really go in out of the, and try to do those things that maybe aren't even used by APTs yet. but could be used potentially because we've seen certain, development of capabilities that are out there. And what this looked like at the beginning was we had 94% that was not detected. So this was like a huge visibility gap as far as detection gap, 94%. And then that was 3 test cases to detect current controls. We went through and we deployed some new logging, especially host-based logging, and that got us up to 64% detected. You're never going to get to 100% detected. That's because of certain actions. You can't detect everything. You can't have an alert on everything. But just deploying Sysmon and getting that host-based visibility really drove the detection capability of the organization up. So with that, we also recommend, if you want to dive down more into the Purple Team framework, check out the video from CactusCon that they get into this. Also check out the Purple Team framework. We'll post that link up later. And that's just a structured way of actually doing purple teaming if you are getting into it and you need that structured plan for your organization. Obviously, just like with the Palantir's framework, if you're smaller, you might not have all the capabilities. Take from there what you need for your organization, what fits for your organization and your size. With that, it's hands-on time. So if you haven't already, go ahead and start your VMs. You should have a link in your inbox. I know some people have had some issues with this. I'm going to go ahead and let mine start up. All right, so hands-on time. You should be able to get into the Unicorn box. The password's unicorn, and then you can launch the Scythe instance or the web GUI, and then log in with unicorn. From here, we want to create our first campaign. I don't know how many of you have never popped a shell before on a box, but we're going to actually pop a shell on a box today. So with that, we'll go ahead and we'll click New Campaign. And then we'll give it a name. For this, we'll go ahead and say First Campaign. We'll take the defaults. We got Windows that we're targeting. You can also, if you do this, in your environment and your Scythe customer, you can scope it down to a certain device or domain and start and end date. We have HTTPS by default. We'll check our parameters, and then we'll scroll down to the bottom, and we'll click Next. Then we'll click over to number 5 on our manual. And with that, we'll want to scroll up. And then underneath load a module, we're going to load ARP. And then we're going to load print screen, which we'll have to scroll down a little bit to get to. And then we're also going to load the run module as well. And now we'll go down to the execution section. And then we're going to click print screen window. And that'll add this step over there. Then we're going to click ARP. And then we're also going to run Who Am I? So now we've built out, just a pretty quick test campaign that we'll go ahead and do. And then we'll also add some compound actions to it. So with that, we'll select MITRE ATT&CK techniques. And then under discovery, T1124. Another easy way to get to there is use the search function. So we'll just say 1124. And then we'll go ahead and we'll add the system time discovery PowerShell. And then we'll add those steps. So now what we can do is we can actually save this off so that we can run it later. Maybe we want to audit the SOC again, or maybe we want to rerun it to see the logs again. So we'll save this as a threat, and we'll say first threat. and then we'll say Scythe example, and we'll go ahead and save that off. And that just allows us to replay that attack again. Now we'll scroll down and we'll go ahead and we'll click next. Physical is fine. And then we'll start campaign. And then we'll also go over to our 6th step in our user manual. And it says we need to click download. So we'll do that, 64-bit exe, and then we'll download the client. And then I'll go ahead and I'll keep this. And then I will double click and run. And then we have active command and control now. If you'd like, you can also come in here and you can actually click on the shell and you can interact with the shell. Of course, you got to wait for the modules to load, moving a bit quick. We do have a lot to cover. But once a run is loaded, I'll be able to execute this. To see where the stage is at. There we go. It's loaded now. And you can click into each of these and you can also see the actions on objectives as well. Such as here we have the print screen and we're able to get the print screen there. And then we see the run who am I execute. So with that, I'll give you a few moments. Let us know if you have any issues with this step. And if you want to, you can go ahead and keep chugging along. We're going to be going and deploying Sysmon. And then that way we can do our emulations and get that Sysmon, that host-based data. We can get it back to the sim that we're going to be using, which is the ELK stack. All right. So now is the time to start, getting that data in from Sysmon. So what you need to do is you need to open up a command prompt with admin privileges. So I'll type in CMD, I'll right click, then I'll run as administrator. I'll select yes. And then I want a CD to the directory. So I'll change directory to C Sysmon. Then I'll enter. Now I'm in the Sysmon directory. I need to start Sysmon, so I'll do Sysmon 64. If you tab through, it'll get it. And then I'll do a -I, and I'll point it towards the Sysmon config, the XML. I will agree. And looks like it installed. So now we need to restart WinLogBeat, which is the forwarder. So if I go next in the lab manual, we need to restart that. And since I'm already in an elevated command prompt, I'll just type in services.msc. And then I will scroll all the way down. And then I will get down to WinLogBeat. I'll go ahead and right click that and I'll click restart. All right, we have that restarted. Now we need to confirm that there's Sysmon logs. So right click Event Viewer from the desktop, select Run as Administrator. So I'll get Event Viewer up, Run as Administrator. Then I'm going to go to Applications and Services. Then I'm going to go to Microsoft. Then Windows. Then I'm going to scroll down until I get to Sysmon. I'll open up the sysmon folder and I'll click on the operational. And there we can see that we have sysmon logs coming in. All right, ping us if you have any questions or had trouble with sysmon getting installed. So we'll move on though to the next step. With that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to terminate the campaign. So if you go to campaigns list, you have your active session. Then we go into first campaign. We'll click the active session, then we'll do the shell. And with that, we're going to run the controller shutdown command. Then we'll get shut down in progress. Now, if we go to the campaign list, we see that they're all inactive. You can go ahead and you can refresh this if you want, but for the sake of time, we'll go ahead and we'll move to the next section, which is the orange worm emulation. If you don't want to use Scythe and you want to use, one of the C2 frameworks that's built into the Linux host, you're more than welcome to do that and develop your own threat intelligence procedures and emulate those. But we also provide this out of the box. So we'll go into our emulation. And then what we need to do is we need to go ahead and we need to migrate the threat into our box. So we'll go to migrate threats and we'll choose a file. And then we'll go to our downloads. And we have our orange worm right here, the JSON. And we'll click OK. And then we'll click import. We get the threat was successfully uploaded. We'll say OK. And now we do a new campaign. So we'll go ahead and we'll click new campaign under campaign manager. We'll go ahead and we'll name it orange worm.
Wanna go potty? Normie, wanna go outside?
Then we'll scroll down. The defaults are fine. We'll double check to make sure that this is appropriate. Sometimes, depending upon how you click it, if you go straight from migrate threat, it could show 127, the local host. It's just though, if you just do it, if you're looking at it from there. But once again, we went to campaign manager, new campaign. Then we're going to take the defaults. And then we're going to come up. We're going to go to compound actions. And this is where we're going to perform the orange worm that we just imported. So click there, and then we'll select orange worm. And we'll click add steps. If you want to, you can move these steps around. You can drag and drop. You can move them. You can also delete them. And then we'll scroll down to the bottom and we'll click next. And then we'll click start campaign. We're just going to use the exe again. So we'll go ahead and we'll do download and download again. If it gets blocked, we'll have to say keep. Once again, we're operating from the assumed breach. Somehow the actor is going to get some code inside us or inside our environment. So we'll go ahead and say keep. And we're operating from that assumed breach approach that somehow there's going to be something, whether it's not always an application, it could be shell code, it could be a DLL. We generate all these. So we're going to go ahead and execute this. And then we have active shell. So now I can go ahead and click in and I can start seeing the actions on objectives that are being conducted that are pre-programmed in. All right. So now we've had our first emulation plan conducted. We had the previous one, but now we've actually done an adversary. So we're going to want to go ahead and save this off as a emulation test. And the way we do that is we'll go to our reports. I'll scroll down to Orangeworm, and then I want to download that CSV file. And we'll use this later in reporting. So once again, that's in reports, then Orangeworm, and then the CSV file. If you like, you can also look at the navigator, the executive summary as well. But for PlexTrack integration later, we'll need the CSV. So now we're going to go to emulating Conti. Definitely one of the bigger ransomware groups. Supposedly, got taken offline from Russian arrest, but who knows? Could be back up sooner than later, or could just migrate to a different group. Either way, common tactics and techniques are used. Red teams have used a lot of their techniques before. Different adversaries are using their techniques just throughout multiple environments. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a new campaign. And then I'll scroll up. And for this, I'm just going to enter Conti. Defaults are fine. Going to scroll down to the bottom. And then I'm going to click next. Now we'll scroll up and we'll use existing user-defined threats. Then I'll select Conti. Then I'll add steps. When we see we actually have logic here, it's going to look to see if it's on a domain. And it's going to check if it is or not. And then it's going to jump down to the next, it's going to skip some steps and just go down to persist. If you want to as well, some of these happen kind of rapid fire. You're able to adjust how often the actions on objectives are performed, the pre-programmed ones. And then if you want to actually add delays too, you can do that as well. So if you want to run, initial domain discoveries, you can do that and then say delay 30 minutes or an hour to give your SOC a chance to see before the actual emulated encryption process starts. But we're just going to take the defaults for this. And then we'll click next. We'll do physical again and then start campaign. Then we're going to do the download again. Once again, Chrome might catch it when it downloads, and we'll just hit keep. We're operating under that assumed breach. Somehow the adversaries are going to get pieces of code in, whether it's an application, whether it's C#, whether it's a DLL or shellcode. They're going to get in somehow, and they're going to perform actions on objectives. So we're trying to catch those actions on objectives. Then we're going to go ahead and launch Conti. And then I'm going to click run. And just like that, we are doing a Conti emulation without much of a headache at all. Just a few clicks. You're not going out and you're not having to do all this step by step. I know there's some red teamers in here. If you have certain different areas that you want to test over and over again, the same test, because you say, hey, we have to do it at this branch, this site, or this network, and then this network. You can have everything just scripted out, and then you can just run the test at different areas that you want to. And that way you're not having to do the same hands-on keyboard every time. So we're going to let Conti run, and we'll click in and we'll watch it. We'll let everyone get caught up to this point, and then we'll resume, and we've now done the emulation. If you remember from the slides before, we've gone out, we got the CTI for Conti and Orangeworm. We analyzed, we did the emulation, and then so now we're here. We have sysmon running, and it's sending logs to our SIM. So next up, we're going to dive into that detection engineering side and get into the SIM more and dive into things. So go ahead and make sure that you do have your Conti emulation running, and let us know if you have any questions. And we'll be back in about 3 to 5 minutes to dive into the more hands-on searching the SIM side. Okay, so now we get into the sim side of things. We've kind of been playing red team for a little bit. We've been doing the adversary emulation, but now we get to jump in and be the defenders and start digging through stuff. So we're going to go ahead and we have the Kibana right here. We'll click that. And then I'll click the hamburger button. And then I'm going to go down to discover and I'll click that. If you need to adjust this, by the way, at any point in time, you can drag this out. The manual also pops out if you need it to. And then once we get the Discover tab up, we're going to change from the Mordor to WinLogBeat 7. And we'll go ahead and select that. And we see we have our data coming in. So now we can start searching through the data. For this, we're going to look for a process name of lsas.exe. Then we'll update our search. Might have to update our time frame. And then there we go. All right, so now we're going to work on our first detection opportunity. A lot of people, they say, oh, I can't detect who am I. It's used too often in my environment. One of the things, though, is if we actually scope down on it, typically you can tune into things. You could, if you just tune out a few different things, you can have a good search. Or if you tune into certain parameters that threat actors are using, you can also do it that way. So with that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do process name of who am I .exe. Then we'll update our search. And now we have 2 events for this. This is a lab environment and production environment. You'd have more who am I hits. So with that, though, what we can do is we can look for how you would tune this in your environment. Is you would come down and you would look for things like username. So for here, we can go to user.name. And we can see that there is this user who often uses it. Sometimes in your environment, you can say, hey, we looked at it and we see that the top 3 values, if we tune those out, we can flag on everything else. Just depends on your risk setup. Maybe one of those accounts is pretty crucial and you need to further tune because you can't tune that account out outright. It might be, a certain command line parameter that you'd have to tune out. So the other thing that we can also look into is we can look into process name for the parent process name. And then this will look different in your environment when you're in your production system. But here, we see that it's both from our emulations. In your environment, there might be a few processes that you see and you say, hey, we can tune these out and we can flag on anything else. So those are some common areas that you can start, diving into your environment to start trying to baseline who am I activity. So next we're going to do NL test. This is a very common one that we see from adversaries. And if you look, if the string that's ran is NL test with a /domain trust. If you Google it, one of the first things that come up is the MITRE attack page for NL test because it's just so commonly used for enumeration. So one of the things you can look at is to say, hey, what's already out there? What detections have been written for this if we didn't get an alert on it? And you can definitely go and you can, we recommend checking out Sigma. So with Sigma, you can go to it and you can look through the detection. And what you're looking for is you're looking actually for the detection area and the selection and then the condition. So you can see this is looking for NL test with domain trust, all trust, trust domains, DC list. There's also a different selection of a DS query, but we're not focusing on DS query right now. So we could actually take this, this code and we can actually go to raw and then we can copy it and then we can throw it into our sim using a uncoder if you're unfamiliar with it. You can just paste that right in. And if you have like a Splunk instance, you can convert it to Splunk. Usually it runs a little bit quicker, but it's saying translating to Splunk right now. Might have to refresh the page. It also does Elastic and other tools. So if I want to do an Elastic alert, I can translate. There's a Splunk that comes through. So now you can take that alert and you can put it into your stack. With that, what we're going to be focusing on though, is we're just going to focus on process of nltest.exe and with a command line of domain trust. We're really just focusing right now. We want to focus on if someone's enumerating our domain trust. And if you want to, you can actually copy and paste this by going copying here. Actually, I'm missing the button. Oops, sorry about that. Guess we do have to type it out. Sometimes I might be missing it, but there's like a button that you can kind of translate between the two. It's always fun working with VMs, right? This is one of those things where we're tuning into one specific command line parameter. And then we see the enumeration of the domain trust. So we're just tuning into there. But then you might look at it and you think, maybe we went too narrow by focusing on that command line parameter. If you remember, we did see in the Sigma rule, we saw some other things like DS query, and we also saw some other command lines that contained all trust, DC list, things like that. So we probably just need to baseline, what does NL test look like in our environment? So we can actually back out of this and we can come back to NL test. And then we can see what the process parent name is. So then we'll go here and we see that we have command prompt and we have Conti. So it looks like it's very low used in our environment. And then if we actually go back and we look at this command prompt, then what we can actually see from this, if we pivot, oops. Kind of used to Splunk lately. Haven't been in Elastic since the last month or so. And we'll set process parent name to CMD. And so what we can actually do is we can pivot on the GUID over here, and we can figure out what the CMD spun off of. I already know, and for the sake of time, that this spun off of one of our payloads. So we see that NL test execution, and you see it also did the domain trust, is very rare in our environment. Now, what it looks like in your environment may be different, but if it's very rarely executed, then you can go ahead and flag on any nltest.exe execution in your environment. You might have to, check out what command line parameters are executing with it or what the parent process is of it. That's just something that you'll have to hunt down in your environment and baseline, but definitely worth flagging on any sort of execution of NL test if you can do that in your environment. All right. And some of the things we're covering here are definitely more applicable to ransomware. We see, a lot of organizations, ransomware is kind of one of the biggest threats to their organization. Maybe they're not being attacked by an APT. So, but people want to get money, so it leads to ransomware. And a lot of these attacks, they have the same procedures pretty much all the time. They're using living off the land tools. And we're going over how you can actually take whatever EDR or sysmon you have deployed and then scope it down, because sometimes maybe it only flags a low alert that you never get to. And this is where emulating flushes out, some of those processes where you say, hey, this only flagged a low alert and we had no response to it. What can we do? And you actually dive in and you tailor that EDR for your organization. So now it's not just, an EDR rule that's written for all organizations that may work or may not. And you actually tailor things down to your specific organization so that you can detect suspicious activity in it. So with that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at net.exe. This is a very common application that's used during enumeration when an actor gets on host. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to type in process name of net.exe. And we'll search for that. Once again, if you ever have any issues, make sure you're on WinLogBeat 7 and then make sure that you're checking your date as well. I'm going to see, let me try to, I don't know if my window accidentally got a little funky on me or what. Yeah, we're going to change that resolution. Should be a little bit better. Then we'll drag this. There we go. Okay, so we have our net.exe execution. So we've casted a wide net. We see a fair amount of hits. If you're in your own environment running this, you'll probably see a lot of hits for the execution. Some of the commands that we ran though were local group, net accounts, and net group. So it says during our discovery phase of what the net command is, we learned that it uses net.exe. That's the actual application that launches off the command line of net. And then we also want to check in to see what's being launched as far as process command line. So we'll go ahead over here and we can type in command. And we can start looking into, in our environment, what certain parameters there are. My environment, there might be certain command line parameters I can tune out and then I can flag on anything else. Or maybe we want to tune into specific things as well. So we want to see what else spawned off of net, because when we do certain things, we want to see what the child processes are or the parent processes are. We know, that this is coming off the emulation, but we also just want to check, is there any child processes that we can go ahead and look into and also tune into or out of. So with that, we'll say process parent name. And we'll type over here, we'll look for process name. And now we see that we actually have a process name of net1. So maybe in discovery of learning about net, we didn't see net1.exe. So this is where we can go and we can research what is net1.exe. So the net command actually launches net.exe and net1.exe. So now you know in your environment, you actually have to baseline both these applications to look for suspicious activity. So with that, we can actually go ahead and for our search, we can do process name of net.exe. Or process name net1.exe. Now we can update our search. So then when you go into your environment, you want to search for both these, and then you can search for parent processes. This is easier done kind of in EDR because you end up seeing your whole string of the parent processes going back and you don't have to pivot as much. Definitely in here, you have to do the GUID, and you have to keep going back, or the process ID as well. But we can look at process parent command line. And we can also look at the parent name. And this is where in your environment, you want to start baselining things of what does it look like in my environment? And then how can I tune out things to find suspicious activity? If it's just too overwhelming, then you might have to tune into specific things such as, the local group enumeration or net accounts or net group. These commands, though, are pretty common. You can go back and you can reference either emulation plans, or you can also reference the Conti playbook, things like that, where these are very common parameters. So once again, you can tune into those parameters for your environment, or even better, if you can just baseline any net or net1 execution in your environment. Next up, we're going to do run DLL32. This is a very common technique that actors are deploying now. Instead of using applications on host, they're trying to bypass AV using run DLL32. So we're going to actually get into enumerating that or emulating that and then detecting that. So we're going to have to go back and we're going to have to perform another emulation. So with that, and then we'll do a new campaign. And then one's fine because we want to keep the name pretty short. The defaults, we'll take them once again. Then we'll click next. And then we'll use existing user defined threats under compound actions. This one will select NetWire rep. And then we'll add steps. And then we'll click next. Physical. And then we'll go to download. At download, we'll do a DLL. And then we'll change this to client main just to keep things simple. If you want, you can go ahead and actually copy this inside the box. And then we have 64 DLL, and then we'll download the Scythe client. And then we'll keep, once again, we're operating under the assumed breach. People will get code into our environment somehow, some way, or if it's shell code, the actual new Scythe deployment not this demo instance that we're using for this lab, but the actual production instance. It lets you do shellcode as well. So you can package that up and get it in however you want into execution. All right, so we have our DLL downloaded. Now what we need to do is we need to run it. So we're going to go to the navigation bar at the bottom. We'll type in CMD and we'll click enter. Now we'll CD to our downloads folder. And then we can do a dir to check. We see our DLL name. So now what we're going to do is we're going to type run DLL32.exe space. And then I'm just going to do 1_ and tab, and then no space, comma. And then I'm going to paste in, or you can type it, the client main, which is the entry point for the DLL. And then I'm going to click enter. So now we have the DLL execution. That process is actually going to run as run DLL32. So it doesn't look like malware per se, right? Because it's not coming off of a malicious application. This is one of those things where training your SOC really comes into handy, because what are you going to do if you get an alert and you say, oh, there's a low level alert from run DLL32.exe. They're going to take run DLL32.exe and they're going to take that hash and they're going to say, hey, this is an approved hash from Microsoft. You know, this looks fine. This run DLL32 is supposed to be on that host, you know, and it could get dropped. So this is where training and doing these emulations really comes in into developing the SOC's capabilities and auditing the response of alerts. So we'll pause here briefly. This can be challenging to get the syntax right. Let us know if you have any questions. Getting run DLL32 up and running. Once again, we'll pause for about 5 minutes to make sure that everyone gets run DLL going and that you have active C2 doing the actions on objectives and emulation plan. All right. We're not necessarily moving on to the next step quite yet. We're just going to touch on something. We've said some things about LawBAS and LawBins and what is this? So there's actually an awesome project out there called the LawBAS project. What this is it's built in things into Windows that can be used maliciously. So for here, you can actually go to the project's run DLL32 page, and you can look at different executions. So here, this is the one we did where we did run DLL32 and we did it with the entry point. So, you know, this is where we're focusing on that procedure. And then also there's a different procedure where it actually calls out to a network. So this is one of those things where you can start baselining in your environment. You know, where does run DLL32 talk to? So maybe it doesn't talk to anywhere. So you can flag any time that it tries to connect to anything. You also have several other ones as well. You have the JavaScript. So anytime, you know, run DLL32 executes with JavaScript, you could flag on that as well, depending upon, you know, your baselining capabilities. You might not be able to baseline out to where you want to, so you might have to tune into things like that. Definitely check out the LawBAS page. It's a great project. They actually went ahead and they did detections as well, which is really a great resource. So you can come in and you can, you know, grab some, if you have Splunk, if you have Sigma, or if you can't leverage either of these because of different limitations, you can also at least see the detection logic and try to implement that even more granularly if you can in your environment. So we're going to go to the next page and we're going to get to the detection side of this. So we're going to search run DLL32. And we get 57 hits. So what we go ahead and we can do is we can, like I said, destination IP is a huge one for run DLL32, because what's happening is when we put that DLL, our C2 is actually running as run DLL32.exe. So what's going to happen is when malicious actors do this in an environment, the C2, unless they migrate process, but generally it's at least going to have a few connections before it migrates the process. So you should look for run DLL 32 making outbound calls. Now, the other thing you can baseline is you can baseline it doing internal calls as well, because let's say that someone's gotten in, and like we showed before, one of the techniques that they pointed out here was a local 10.10. So it can be used as local if they're pivoting their C2 through another host inside. So we're going to look at the connections for this. So we're going to say destination.ip. And then we can see that the only thing it's talking to is our server that's emulating a malicious C2 server. So, this is where we can go in and we can say, hey, look, anytime rundl32.exe makes any connection with an IP, let's flag on it, because that just looks suspicious. So there you go. Definitely recommend this as well. Also, if you have to, if like IPs are too difficult because maybe it's hitting something, you might have to do DNS instead. Just depends on your setup in your organization. Next up, we're going to do unmanaged PowerShell. So I haven't seen a lot of ransomware actors use this yet, but I have seen other actors use this. And what it is it's PowerShell commands and functionality without PowerShell.exe. This is one of those ones people started getting on and knowing that PowerShell is actually used malicious now. So they started looking at PowerShell very heavily. And so that's kind of like led some actors to develop different techniques, such as using like C# or bringing other things in, doing MS build type things. That's another living off the land technique. Or doing unmanaged PowerShell, because people are they're monitoring for PowerShell.exe. The other thing too is they'll do like they'll try to rename PowerShell, but what you do is you can just look for the actual original file name as well. But the way some people write alerts is just to look for PowerShell.exe. If you rename it, it doesn't really show up in your search string, so that's kind of an issue. But this also addresses if it's renamed or if it's unmanaged. So with that, what we'll do is we'll go back to our emulation page and we'll do a new campaign. I'm just going to label this one PS for PowerShell. And then we'll take the defaults again. And then I'm going to go up to my loaded modules, or load a module. Then I'm going to come down, and then I'm going to use PowerShell. This one uses Upshell, and once again, this is unmanaged PowerShell. It's also known as PowerPick for those familiar on the red team side with PowerPick. It's unmanaged PowerShell, PowerShell script without PowerShell.exe. And then, so we've loaded that. Now we're going to go to the execute and action, and we're going to do a custom action. And we'll do PowerShell. And I'm just going to add for this simple test, because we're just trying to catch unmanaged PowerShell, right? We don't need to emulate 15 things after it. We just want to focus on this. Now, eventually we'd want to put this into a chain. But right now we're just going to focus on this one detection opportunity. So I'm just going to do a command that's test PowerShell, and that'll just make it run. All right. I can scroll up. I can make sure that we have everything. Yep. There we go. It's going to load. Then it's going to run my command. And then I'll click next, start campaign. If you want to do it through the DLL way, you can do it that way. But for simplicity, EXE is just fine. Once again, we'll keep it. I'll go to my downloads. We have our PS. Also, what you can also do is you can rename these to whatever application you want. Maybe you have certain alerts on, different parent-child processes. So if you want this to be like java.exe, or if you want it to be Apache or something, you can do that, or you can also process hollow over as well. And that way you don't actually have to exploit the process itself, which can be, a bit more concerning, especially if you're trying to do emulation in production, which we suggest, because you want to actually, you want to test those processes just like a real threat actor. They're not going to be on some gold image host doing the testing in a private little area. They're gonna get into your your regular domain, be in your production environment. So that's what you want to replicate, so that when they show up, you've already practiced this before. So we'll click that, and now we have that running. We'll pop over, and then we'll wait, and we get our C2. And then it uploads. And then we get our run. It's not going to be able to run the actual command because it's just a test. And then we know that we have successful execution and our emulation of unmanaged PowerShell. So now we can go back to our Elastic, and we can get into the detection opportunities for this. All right, detecting unmanaged PowerShell. Okay, so in Elastic, what we're going to do is we're going to come back and we're going to look for the DLL. So this is the DLL that's loaded. There's another one, I'll post it in chat, but we're going to baseline this one first. So system management automation DLL, and we'll hit update. Then what we want to do is we want to look at the process names for this. And you want to do this in your EDR or SIM. And then we'll look at process names. So obviously we want to tune out PowerShell.exe. And then once we tune that out, we see that the only value left is our emulation. So this is a quick way that you can go ahead and baseline your environment to see what's loading the PowerShell DLL. And then you can flag on anything that loads it. The other DLL as well, once you get that done in your environment, you'll also have to do this other DLL. And I'll post those in chat. Another good resource on this too is Palantir has a whole blog on it. There's several blogs on unmanaged PowerShell and PowerPick, but from a detection standpoint, it really comes down to baselining your environment to see what processes are loading this. So you just want to go ahead, search for the DLLs, and then just start going through and knocking out typical processes. That way, when something funky does it, like calc.exe or Notepad or whatever it is, uploads or loads the DLL, you'll be able to detect it and figure out what's going on there. So finally, we get back to we've done our process, we've done our detection engineering on several things here, and then you have to get that back to dissemination and reporting. So this is one of the areas that we sync into Plextrack. If you didn't do it already, one of the things we need is the Conti, or no, the orange worm. Excuse me. So under reports, orange worm, and then the CSV file, and that's what we're going to use. So tracking with Plextrack. We'll go ahead, we'll click the icon, we'll advance, and then we'll proceed. And then we'll log in unicorn@scythe.io. With a password of unicorn. And so we already have some pre-populated things in here. And you can see that we have in process and open. You can also close. And this allows you to actually track different detection opportunities and things like that. So what we want to do is we'll come down to engagements and manage underneath run books, and then we'll click manage. And then we want to import a run book. So it's up here. We'll click import run book. And then we'll swap this over to Scythe. And then we'll double click in here. And then we have the thread JSON. So we'll go ahead and select that. Then we'll click upload. And then we'll get it completed. I'll wait for a second just so everyone can get that uploaded. Once again, that's the JSON that we're uploading. So now we want to document the engagement. So with that, we go to our orange worm and we do create engagement. And then I'm just going to say OW test 1. Put it on our Unicorn client. And I'll select begin new engagement. So a title, and then put it to the client, and then begin new engagement. So once you're here, we're on step 4 in the engagement overview. Select the import button, which is right here. We'll go ahead and import. Make sure that it's on Scythe. We'll click in, and then we have our CSV. So we'll go ahead and import that. I'll click submit. This is where we have to go through. We don't plug into a security stack, right? A real adversary isn't going to tell your, EDR like, hey, I'm here. Oh, the EDR caught this, so I'm going to change this. The EDR caught that, or the AV caught that. Like, we're replicating a real adversary. We're able to send syslogs and Splunk logs out for different reporting and pivots if you want to, but there's no auto population. We're really designed, to emulate a real adversary in the environment, and also helping red teams do that as well to a more efficient standard. So what we're going to do is we have to come in and we have to go through the different procedures that were performed for this. We're not going to do each one because time's limited, and also people like to play in the lab. But we're going to hop into the run who am I. So we're on, if you're following along, step 7. And then we'll click open. And then we'll come down and we'll click it was success by the red team. And then we'll go over to the blue team. And we'll say that it didn't raise an alert because it's just whoami.exe. Most alerts don't flag on this, but we can actually baseline it in our environment, and we know that we can develop a detection, an alert, and a response for it. So we can say forensically logged. And then we'll mark as complete. We're going to go back to the overview once we're done here. I misspoke. I said step 7, but we're on step 5. Sorry about that. And then we're going to do submit engagement. So right up here, we'll go ahead. And if you want to, you can actually go through and play with different settings here for different reportings. And we'll submit. And then after submitting, oh, I forgot my own step. We need to set it to a medium level finding. So if I go, sorry for those following along. I will redo mine. All right, since I missed the step, I'll show you right up here, select finding. We're going to put a medium. And then we're going to say it was successful and blue team forensically logged it. Then we'll submit or mark as complete. Back to overview, and then we'll submit engagement. And now we see we have a medium, and obviously you can put your findings as whatever you see fit for your environment and your threat profile. But this allows you to also go through and actively track things as well. And then if I come up to the top, if I go to export Word doc, once again, you would actually go through all the different steps and, make sure that you had the appropriate response, the appropriate logging, the red team outcome. And then you get an example though of what a report would look like. You can put your executive summary in as either your detection engineer or, if you're a red team or whoever you are, whatever your skill set is. And then you would have your findings here. We only have the one because we only analyzed the one procedure. Obviously, you would walk through each one, and then you would have everything in your report. So the other thing after that, what we can do is we can click analytics. And then we can look and we can see different analytics that we like. And we also have most critical issues. So for this, what we want to do is we want to say, hey, we've seen a lot of threat actors. This could be a SOC manager or a CTI team that's doing prioritization of most critical issues of procedures. And we'll go ahead and we'll open this. And then we'll click on the status. And you can link it to Jira, or we can add an update. And we're going to go ahead and say it's in process. And we can assign it to ourselves, or we can assign it to George. I'll be polite and not assign it to my boss. So we'll go ahead. I'll assign it to Unicorn. We can put any comments here that we need to, And then we can submit that. And now we have that for tracking. So we actually have, we've performed the emulation. we've identified if it was logged or not, or alerted or not, and then we can see that it's an open issue because it didn't generate the appropriate response or alert. So if we go back to the analytics main page, and then up to the top, we select runbooks. We can actually track different runbooks as well. So if we're running these in, different environments, or we want to see it over time, we'd like to see improvement. So maybe someone closed out, said, hey, we baselined who am I? All right, well, let's rerun that campaign that had that, or it might be who am I, an NL test, whatever. So now we should have like 4 more detection capabilities around this adversary emulation plan. And then we can actually go through and we can look at different blue team outcomes of logged or not logged, or alerted or prevented. We also see different tactics covered to see what we're testing. And we can also see red teams outcomes. We only did the certain procedures, and we didn't have, EDR blocking anything or anything like that. And this is where, as you come down here, over time, you can actually get a nice chart of what the outcomes were. We actually have a sample of what that looks like from an engagement that we did as it improved over time. With that, you can play more with Scythe. We also have a SANS Slingshot C2 Matrix Edition. And then we also have CPEs available. So that's the last thing in your slide deck. There's about just shy of 20 or a little over 20 minutes left. If you'd like to play some more, go right ahead. Thank you for coming out, by the way. Hope everyone is healthy. Hope you have a great weekend. Thanks for attending. If you want to play some more with your extra lab time, feel free to do so. There's also some more detection capabilities in the NetWire rat that you can work on. I'll go ahead and post that. You can test these. You might have to actually modify the sysmon config for some of those, or for one of them. One of them is looking for a certain reg key. And so you actually have to modify the config in sysmon to do that. If you want to do other emulations as well, you can come into Scythe and you can go to migrate threats. And then at the top, you can choose file. And then we have either compound actions, and these are one-on-one actions that you can actually take. So you can just do these as one-off detection opportunity tests, or you can come in and you can do another threat if you want to. And you can just upload those JSONs. Let us know if you have any questions. Thank you so much for coming out. Once again, we have 22 minutes left. Your lab, I believe, ends at 4 as well. I know some of you wish to play more in the lab. We will have another one in February. I don't know if I'll be doing that. I know we have a adversary. Oh, Elaine says it's 4:10 today. Thank you, Elaine. We do have, regular purple team workshops. We do have ones focused on the adversary side. This is the detection side. So, if you want to play more in the lab and learn more, come back for a different workshop. Please also, if you get the chance, please fill out our survey as well. That helps us improve our lab, and that helps, helps you have a better experience if you come back, or helps others have a better experience as well. Happy Friday. Enjoy the lab. Ping us if you have any questions. We'll be on for the last 20 minutes, and we'll help you out if you run into any issues. Thank you for the nice words, everyone who's posting. Enjoy your weekend. Have a good one. Take care.